Have you ever walked past a place and felt an unsettling chill creep up your spine? Something that told you without words that there was more to that place than meets the eye? That's exactly how the residents of Oakwood Apartments felt every time they glanced at apartment 4, but no one dared ask why the door to the apartment had been nailed shut. It was a mystery wrapped in terror, a secret buried beneath layers of whispers and fear. They all knew the story. Apartment 4B had been empty for years. Yet the door remained sealed, hidden behind rusted nails and faded wood. Strange sounds echoed from within at night, footsteps that didn't belong to anyone, whispers that seemed to call out to you when you were alone. And every tenant who had dared to look too closely, well, they never quite came back the same. But there's something about human curiosity that can't be contained. The truth always seeks to escape, no matter how tightly it's sealed away. What really happened in apartment 4B? What are the secrets that lie behind the wooden planks, and why did no one ever ask why the door was nailed shut? The time has come to find out, but beware. Curiosity often leads to terrifying discoveries. Are you brave enough to uncover the terrifying truth about apartment 4B? What do you think could be hiding behind that nailed door? Comment below with your theories and ideas. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more spine-chilling stories like this one. It was a bitterly cold evening when the first whisper of the mystery surrounding apartment 4B made its way through the halls of Oakwood Apartment. It was early December, and snowflakes swirled violently outside, painting the windows with a curtain of white. Inside, the warmth of the building didn't seem to reach every corner, especially the hallway where the door to apartment 4B stood, sealed shut by several heavy nails that glinted eerily under the dim, flickering lights. The door was not much to look at, just an old wooden entryway, its surface cracked with age and weathering. Yet it had become something of an enigma, a place of hushed conversations and curious glances. It had been that way for as long as anyone could remember. Yet no one dared to ask the obvious question: why had it been nailed shut? Tessa Moore, a young woman who had recently moved into Oakwood, found herself staring at the door one late evening. She had heard the whispers, the stories shared between tenants, about strange noises, flickering lights, and the cold drafts that seeped through the cracks in the walls. Some said that whoever lived in apartment 4B had vanished without a trace. Others claimed that the apartment was cursed, haunted by a terrible entity that had driven its occupants mad. And then there were the more sinister tales, those that suggested something far worse had happened. That evening, Tessa had just come back from the local market, her arms loaded with bags of groceries. The hallway was nearly empty, save for the occasional hum of the building's aging heater. As she reached her apartment door, she glanced over at the sealed entry. The silence was unnerving, the way the nails seemed to shimmer in the dim light. She had always thought there was something unsettling about the place, but now she couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. Why is it still sealed? She muttered to herself, more out of frustration than curiosity. No one had ever dared speak openly about it. It was almost as if there was an unspoken rule among the residents to ignore the sealed door, to pretend it wasn't there. But Tessa wasn't like the others. Her curiosity burned like a fire in her chest, and she found herself pacing back and forth in front of the door, her mind racing. What was behind it? Why had no one ever bothered to remove the nails? Why was it still such a mystery? Was it possible that the tenants before her had known something she didn't? Something dangerous? Maybe I'll find out, she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. That night, as the wind howled outside, Tessa lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. The apartment was silent, save for the occasional creak of the building settling into the cold. The more she thought about it, the more the curiosity gnawed at her. What if the stories were true? What if there was something trapped behind that door waiting to be freed? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp noise from the hallway. It sounded like a faint knock, barely audible but distinct enough to send a shiver up her spine. Tessa sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. She strained her ears, listening intently. Knock. Another one. This time louder. The sound was coming from somewhere deep within the building. Her first thought was that it was the wind, or maybe the old pipes. But something inside her told her it wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Her gaze shifted to the hallway, where the door to apartment 4B stood, silent and still. There it was again, the knock, a sharp echoing thud that rattled her bones. Her breath hitched in her throat, and she instinctively pulled the covers tighter around herself, as if that would protect her from whatever was lurking just beyond the walls. It wasn't the wind. Slowly, almost unwillingly, Tessa slid out of bed and crept toward the door. She pressed her ear to the cold wood, the faint sound of knocking still ringing in her mind. The longer she stood there, the more the sound seemed to grow, as though it was coming from within the very bones of the building itself. The knocking was followed by a soft scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across the wood. It made her stomach churn. Her pulse quickened. "This is crazy," she whispered to herself, but her feet remained glued to the floor. It was like an invisible force was pulling her toward the sealed door. Tessa didn't know how long she stood there, mesmerized by the strange noises, until something else caught her attention. A faint glow too subtle to be real light, but enough to catch her eye, came from beneath the cracks around the doorframe. At first it was almost imperceptible, but it grew brighter the longer she looked at it. Her heart hammered in her chest. The glow pulled. For a moment she considered running back to her apartment and locking the door behind her. It was the smart thing to do. She didn't know what was happening, and she certainly didn't want to find out, but her legs refused to obey. The mystery was too strong, the pull too irresistible. Before she could stop herself, Tessa found her fingers wrapping around the cold metal of the doorknob, her mind screaming at her to let go, but she twisted it. The knob turned, and the door groaned as it gave way. Just a fraction, enough to send a blast of cold air into her face. Her breath caught in her throat. The room beyond the door was dark, the air thick with dust, and the smell of something foul. The glow, that eerie pulse, flickered from somewhere deep inside. She couldn't see clearly, but there was something there, something alive. Before Tessa could step forward, a shrill scream pierced the air, so loud, so jarring, it felt like it came from within her own soul. It was a scream of terror, of agony, that echoed through the walls, seeping into her bones. Her hand froze on the door. The world around her seemed to spin as her heart raced in her chest. She stepped back. The door slammed shut. The knocking stopped. The glow faded. Tessa stumbled backward, shaking, her mind racing. What had just happened? What was that? She couldn't explain it. No one would believe her, but something told her deep down that the mystery of apartment 4B was far from over, and now it was her turn to face whatever it was that had been sealed away for so long. The next morning, Tessa couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her like a heavy blanket. The events of the previous night replayed over and over in her mind, each one more disturbing than the last. What had she seen or heard? The scream, the glowing light, the strange, almost otherworldly presence behind the door. Her head spun, just thinking about it, but she had no one to turn to. Her neighbors, who might have known something, remained tight-lipped whenever she brought up apartment 4. The subject of the apartment was a taboo in Oakwood, a whispered conversation for when no one else was listening. Tessa realized she wasn't the only one who had felt the creeping suspicion, the weight of curiosity. Every resident had experienced it in some way, but they all seemed to have made an unspoken agreement to pretend it wasn't there, to avoid acknowledging that door at all costs. Tessa didn't know how to make sense of it. There was something deeply wrong with the apartment. The door had been sealed for a reason, but what was that reason? The thought that it could be connected to something darker made her stomach churn. She took a deep breath, determined to leave the mystery behind her and focus on the more mundane aspects of her life. The last thing she needed was to become obsessed with something so terrifying, so unknown. But as she made her way out of her apartment that morning, she couldn't ignore the feeling of eyes watching her, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. As she passed the door to 4B, something caught her eye. There, in the crack between the doorframe and the wall, was something new, a piece of paper. It wasn't there the night before, and it looked freshly wedged in. Without thinking, Tessa bent down and retrieved it, her pulse quickening. The paper was old, yellowed with age, and crinkled at the edges. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. The message, written in jagged, hurried handwriting, was barely legible. "Get out now. It knows you're here." Tessa's heart skipped a beat. The ink appeared to be smudged, as if the writer had been in a hurry or perhaps frightened. The handwriting was frantic, as though someone had been desperately trying to warn her, but the paper itself seemed strangely out of place, like it had been left there just for her. Her mind raced. Who would have left this note? Who had been in apartment 4B? Tessa knew deep down that whatever she had witnessed the night before was only the beginning. She felt the presence of someone or something behind her. She whipped around, her breath catching in her throat, but the hallway was empty. No one was there. It was as if the building itself was alive, watching her, waiting for her to make her next move. Her fingers curled around the note, the words echoing in her mind. Get out now. But what did it mean? Who was the person warning her? What was behind the door? Get out now, Tessa whispered to herself, her eyes darting to the door. For the first time since moving in, the idea of leaving the building crossed her mind. But even as she considered it, a voice in her mind pushed her forward. No one else will solve this. You need to know what's behind the door. You need to understand. The conflict in her chest was overwhelming. She wanted to run, to leave Oakwood, to never think about 4B again, but she couldn't. The mystery had already dug its claws into her. Tessa folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket. Her mind was made up. She had to go back to that door. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Every conversation she had seemed to drift back to apartment 4B, no matter how hard she tried to focus on something else. The words from the note played over and over in her head. It knows you're here. There was a force at work here, something powerful, something ancient, that had been hidden away for far too long. That night she gathered her courage and made her way to the hallway again. Her heart was pounding, her breath shallow as she approached the door. She paused just outside, her hands trembling. The glow from earlier that week was no longer visible, but something else had taken its place. An oppressive stillness. It felt as though the entire building had gone silent, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for her to make her next move. Tessa knew she couldn't turn back now. She had to see what was behind the door. She reached for the doorknob once again, her fingers slick with sweat. The door creaked as it turned, the sound too loud in the quiet hallway. She hesitated. The air around her seemed thick, charged with some unseen energy. Her pulse hammered in her ears, but she couldn't stop herself. With one swift motion, she yanked the door open. This time, the darkness inside the apartment was even more suffocating than before. The dim light from the hallway barely penetrated the shadows within. There was no glow, no pulsating light to guide her, just an impenetrable blackness. The air smelled foul, stale, and musty, like something had been left to rot. The floor creaked underfoot as she stepped inside, her breath coming faster now. She strained her eyes, trying to make out anything in the oppressive darkness. There was a strange noise, a faint rustling sound, as though something was moving in the corner of the room. Tessa froze. She wasn't alone. Her heart pounded in her chest as she strained her ears. The rustling grew louder, more frantic. Then came the whispers, soft at first, like a wind carrying secrets through the room. Tessa's stomach churned. The whispers sounded familiar. They were speaking her name. Tessa, Tessa, Tessa. The voice was low, almost soothing, but it made her blood run cold. She couldn't breathe. The temperature in the room dropped, and her skin prickled with a coldness so deep it felt like ice was flowing through her veins. Her eyes darted around, but she couldn't see anything clearly. The room was simply too dark. But then, from the corner of the room, a figure began to emerge. Slowly it stepped into the dim light, its form shifting and blurring. Tessa's scream died in her throat. Tessa stood frozen in the doorway of apartment 4B, her muscles tense, her breath shallow. The figure in the dark was no hallucination. It was real. It had taken form, pulled itself from the black depths of the apartment like it had been waiting there for centuries. Its body was twisted, malformed, like it had once been human, but had long since been consumed by something else. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, and its skin looked like aged parchment stretched too tightly over sharp, jagged bones. Its face, or what should have been a face, was a nightmare of shifting flesh, hollow sockets, and a maw that quivered and cracked open to reveal rows of black broken teeth. It didn't walk. It slithered forward, pulling itself along the warped floorboards with long, sinewy arms. The whispers grew louder with each movement. They no longer came from just one voice. They came from many, overlapping, desperate, filled with rage and sorrow. Tessa, come see what we've kept for you. The words clawed at her brain like nails scraping against her skull. She stumbled backward into the hallway, heart slamming against her ribs. The figure advanced, crossing the threshold, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed the thing could leave the apartment. But it didn't. It stopped at the edge of the doorway, as though bound by some invisible force. Its limbs trembled with frustration, the skin on its arms peeling back to reveal pulsing, raw tissue underneath. Its mouth opened again, emitting a sound so piercing, so unnatural, it didn't register as a scream, but more like metal grinding against glass. Tessa bolted down the hallway, not daring to look back. The whispering didn't fade. It followed her, crawling inside her head. She felt it behind her eyes, in her ears, in the center of her chest, like a weight pressing down on her soul. She slammed her apartment door shut, locked every bolt, and collapsed against it, gasping for breath. She sat there for hours, her body trembling. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. At some point she must have passed out on the floor because she awoke to the sound of knocking, not from the hallway, from inside her apartment. The sound was coming from the wall that connected her apartment to 4B. Slow, steady, deliberate. She stood, her legs weak beneath her, and pressed her ear to the wall. Knock, knock, knock. Then a voice, so clear it was as if the speaker was right behind her. "Why did you open the door?" Tessa screamed, and stumbled back, knocking over a lamp that shattered on the floor. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her fingers trembling. But there was no dial tone, only static. Then a whisper cut through the static. "Come back." She threw the phone across the room. She needed answers. If she couldn't get help from the police, then she'd find someone who knew. Someone in the building had to know the truth about apartment 4B. Her first stop was Mrs. Garrity in 2A, an elderly woman who had lived in Oakwood since the 90s. People said she'd once been the building's manager back when it had been a bustling, upscale residence. Tessa knocked on her door, the pounding in her chest louder than her fist. The door creaked open slowly. Mrs. Garrity peered out with one eye, her face half covered by the shadows inside her apartment. "You're the girl in 3C, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told them not to let anyone live on the third floor anymore." "I need to talk to you," Tessa said. "About 4B. The old woman's expression twisted with horror. "No, child, no. You mustn't." "I opened the door," Tessa confessed. Something came out." Mrs. Garrity stepped back, her hand flying to her mouth. "God help us," she whispered. "You don't know what you've done." "Then tell me," Tessa insisted. "Please." The old woman hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. Inside the apartment, the walls were covered in crosses, dream catchers, protective charms, some familiar, others strange and ancient. The room smelled of sage and mothballs. Mrs. Garrity sat on a faded couch and motioned for Tessa to do the same. It started in 19. A man named Elias Hart moved into 4B. He was quiet, but strange, kept to himself. People said he studied the occult rituals, curses, things not meant for mortal minds. Then the disappearances started. First, the cats, then a child, then one night, Elias himself vanished. But no one ever saw him leave. Tessa leaned forward. What happened after that? The police came, found symbols all over the apartment, strange writing on the walls, blood on the ceiling. The landlord sealed the place with nails blessed by a priest, wrapped chains around the door and told everyone to forget it existed. But the darkness in there, it waited, it learned, and it feeds on those who are curious enough to awaken it. Tessa's throat tight. "And now that I've opened it," Mrs. Garrity gave her a look filled with pity and fear. "It knows you now. It won't stop." That night, the knocking began again. But this time, it wasn't just the wall. It came from her closet, then the bathroom mirror, then beneath her bed. Each knock carried with it a whisper, a name, a memory that wasn't hers. Images filled her head, visions of an old man, with hollow eyes, chanting in a circle of salt and blood, of shadows creeping across walls, leaving burn marks in their wake, of children, with stitched mouths, screaming silently in their sleep. She tried to sleep, but the whispers would not let her. They spoke in tongues, in languages she didn't understand, but somehow felt. They weren't just calling to her, they were pulling her. And then the writing started to appear on her walls, her ceiling, even the inside of her refrigerator. Words scrawled in what looked like ink, but smelled like rot. We see you now. You belong to the hollow. Elias, wait. Tessa knew one thing for sure. If she didn't find out what had really happened to Elias Hart, and why apartment 4B had been sealed, she would never survive whatever was waking up beneath the floorboards of Oakwood. Something ancient had been disturbed, and it was hungry. Oakwood was no longer just an old apartment building to Tessa. It had become a living nightmare, a twisted cathedral of secrets, and she was its unwilling priestess. Since opening the door to apartment 4B, sleep had become a dangerous luxury. The entity she had seen, no, awakened, had taken hold of the building. Its whispers now seeped through the pipes, echoed in the creaks of the wood, and trembled through the light fixtures. And worse, the other residents were beginning to act strange. It started subtly. Mr. Langdon in 1F, who once greeted her cheerfully every morning, now stood for hours in the lobby, staring at the broken elevator with glassy eyes. The old couple from 5D no longer responded to her knocks, though their television flickered on at all hours, broadcasting static and faint murmurs. Children who played in the courtyard no longer laughed. Instead, they sang old rhymes in voices too deep for their age, in languages Tessa couldn't place. She needed answers. Tessa scoured public records, newspaper archives, and even old property deeds. Anything tied to Oakwood's past. She learned it was built in 1911, on the ruins of an orphanage that burned down under mysterious circumstances. 31 children had perished in the flames. The only survivor was a boy named Elias Hart. Elias Hart. Her blood ran cold. According to the reports, Elias had claimed the other children were taken by something under the orphanage. He spoke of the hollow, a realm between the walls and beneath the floors, a space where forgotten souls twisted into something else. His claims were dismissed as trauma-induced delusions, and he was committed to a sanitarium until adulthood. Years later, Elias resurfaced. He purchased Oakwood, renamed it, and moved into apartment 4B. Tessa's hands trembled as she pieced the timeline together. Elias had brought something back with him. Or maybe it had never left, and now it had found a new voice in her. But there was more. In an archived news article from 1973, a maintenance worker named Arturo Diaz had written a personal testimony never published, a handwritten letter. She found it in a donation box at the local historical society, folded and yellowed with age. They don't want anyone knowing. But Elias didn't disappear. I saw it with my own eyes. He became something else, something that pulled itself apart and crawled into the spaces between. I heard the voices, saw the walls breathe. I sealed 4B myself. But I don't know if it was enough. If you're reading this, it's awake again. You can't run. You can only bury it. But it has to be fed, always fed. Tessa felt the blood drain from her face. The door hadn't just been nailed shut. It had been sacrificed, entombed. The apartment wasn't a room anymore. It was a mouth. And it was hungry. That night, her apartment changed. The layout seemed different. The walls shifted slightly, as if the building was sighing. Doors she hadn't noticed before stood ajar, leading into rooms that shouldn't exist. One opened to a narrow stairwell descending deep underground into blackness. Tessa stood at its mouth, flashlight in hand, her breath fogging up in the sudden chill. She should have run, but something called to her, something old and hollow and patient. She descended. Each step creaked with age and grief. The air smelled of mildew and something else. Coppery metallic. Blood. The walls were tight, carved into dirt and stone. And the whispers, oh, the whispers were louder here. They pressed in on her, chanted her name with reverence and malice. Tessa, Tessa. The stairs opened into a chamber circular, earthen, its walls covered in ancient glyphs, carved in haste and panic, symbols that twisted when she tried to look directly at them. In the center, a hole yawned in the floor, wide, deep, bottomless. A void. Tessa approached it, the flashlight trembling in her hand. As she neared, her light flickered and then went out completely. From within the hole came the sound of wet breathing. And then something began to climb out. Its hands came first, long, many-fingered and slick with black fluid. Its body followed, too large for the space, folding over itself, bones cracking as it reshaped. It pulled itself halfway out of the pit and paused, its many eyes fixed on her. Not all were human. "I knew you'd come," it said in a voice like thunder and rust. "Blood calls to blood." Tessa screamed and ran, but the stairwell was gone. Instead, she found herself in the halls of Oakwood again, but twisted, distorted. The wallpaper bubbled and pulsed. The floor shifted under her feet. She was inside a living nightmare, and it had made her a part of it. One by one, the doors around her creaked open, and figures stepped out. Residents of the building, their eyes glazed over, mouths muttering nonsense in perfect unison. Children, adults, even the cat from 2E, each one changed, hollowed. They advanced. She turned and ran until she reached her apartment and slammed the door. She barricaded it with furniture, breathing hard. Her phone was dead. The lights wouldn't turn on. Outside, the building seemed to breathe. Then her closet door creaked open. Inside was a mirror. It hadn't been there before. In the reflection, Tessa saw not her own image, but Elias Hart, still young, still hollow-eyed, smiling with blood in his teeth. His mouth moved, and in a voice that was hers and not hers, he whispered, "The door is never enough." The mirror cracked. Tessa woke up screaming on her floor. It was morning. Was it a dream? No. On the wall, in blood-red script, "You've seen us now. There is no waking." She had to leave Oakwood, had to burn it down if necessary. But first she needed to find Arturo Diaz. If he was still alive, he might know how to seal the hollow for good. As she left her apartment, a hallway stretched longer than it should have, and on every door a fresh note had been nailed. Each one read, "Feeding time." The streets outside Oakwood should have been a relief. Normal, loud, pulsing with life. But to Tessa, everything felt off. The air was too still. People on the sidewalks passed her with blank faces, like mannequins on strings. A child pointed at her, mouth opening in a silent scream, but his mother didn't notice. Cars stalled at green lights. Birds flew in strange spiraling patterns overhead. The hollow had touched the world outside. It had leaked. Tessa kept moving, gripping the crumpled address she'd scribbled from the hospital archive. Arturo Diaz was her only thread now, the last person to have witnessed Elias Hart's final transformation. If he was still alive, if the hollow hadn't already consumed him, he might know how to reverse what she'd done. She found him in a ramshackle house at the edge of town, half swallowed by overgrown ivy and thyme. A dozen dream catchers dangled from the porch, wind chimes made from bones clinking in the breeze. She hesitated, then knocked. The door opened slowly, revealing a gaunt man with hollow eyes and a face carved by fear. He studied her like a priest might a cursed relic. "You opened it," he whispered. Tessa nodded. He stepped aside without another word. Inside, the house was a shrine to paranoia. Salt lined every window. Dozens of candles burned constantly, each with strange symbols drawn in black wax on their sides. Walls were covered with newspaper clippings, maps of Oakwood, sketches of symbols, and horrifying drawings. Limbless creatures crawling out of mirrors, stairwells spiraling into mouths. Elias Hart with snakes for veins. "I saw the hollow once," Arturo rasped, lighting another candle. "Just once, that was enough. I need to know how to close it," Tessa said, "before it spreads." He shook his head. "You don't close the hollow, you feed it, or it takes what it wants. I'm not feeding it anyone. Arturo looked at her, truly looked. Then you better be ready to sacrifice something else. He walked over to a rusted metal chest, unlocked it with a bone key, and pulled out a bundle wrapped in black silk. Inside was a knife, not just any blade, but something ancient. Its surface shimmered like obsidian, etched with glyphs that writhed subtly when touched by light. This is the taker, he said. Elias used it in the final ritual, said it was forged where nightmares sleep. It doesn't kill, it removes, cuts the spirit, not the flesh. Tessa reached for it. Her fingers barely grazed the handle before a sharp pain jolted through her palm. She recoiled, looking at her hand. A line of black had traced across her skin like a tattoo, and the whispers returned, louder, hungrier. Arturo's candles flickered violently. A noise, deep and shuddering, echoed from beneath the floorboards. You've brought it here, Arturo hissed. You shouldn't have come. The walls pulsed. A cabinet shattered. A mirror in the corner cracked in slow, deliberate spiderwebs. The hollow was watching. Tessa grabbed the taker, ignoring the way it burned her skin. Tell me how the ritual works. You can't do it alone, he said, backing away. You need blood, memory, sacrifice, and the last echo of Elias' heart. Before she could ask what that meant, the house screamed. The floor split open. A black arm slithered out, fingers tipped with claws dragging a headless creature behind it, its body stitched from old skin, its ribs exposed and moving like bellows. It lunged. Arturo pushed Tessa back. Run! She hesitated, but his scream was final, desperate. Tessa bolted out the door as the creature engulfed Arturo, its many mouths opening and closing in sickening rhythm. She didn't look back. She couldn't. By the time she reached the street, her ears were filled with chanting, the same twisted lullaby the children had been humming in Oakwood. Now strangers on the street were singing it too, heads turning slowly to follow her. The hollow had claimed another soul, and it was growing. That night she returned to Oakwood, blade in hand. The building had changed. The bricks bled. Windows opened and closed like eyelids. The fire escape was coiled like a serpent against the side, and the front doors, long sealed, stood wide open, inviting as she stepped through. The lobby shifted around her. The air grew colder. The wallpaper melted. Each hallway seemed longer than before, looping back on itself, floors merging into one another like a Mobius strip of terror. Faces watched her from beneath the wallpaper pressed into the surface, screaming silently. She made her way to four. In its place was a black archway pulsing like a throat. She stepped inside. Within, reality folded. The room was vast now, impossible in size, the floor stretching endlessly into shadow. Floating above her were fragments of furniture suspended midair like debris, caught in a vortex. The ceiling dripped black water, and in the center of it all stood Elias Hart. He was unchanged, still young, still cold, but his eyes were galaxies of horror. You brought the blade, he said, smiling. Just like I did. I'm not like you. No, he replied, stepping closer. You're worse. Because you think you can fight it. He gestured to the walls where images began to form. Scenes of Tessa's past, but wrong. Her childhood home warped, her parents faceless, her memories bleeding out, rewritten by the hollow. You've been part of this longer than you know. She lunged, slashing with the taker. The blade connected, but instead of blood, light poured from Elias's chest. A light filled with screams and shadowed figures. He didn't fall. He laughed. You've opened the last door, Tessa. There's no closing it now. You can only feed it. Then the world cracked. The walls shattered, and a tide of hands surged from the floor, reaching for her, pulling her downward into a spiral of black and bone and flame. The hollow was awake, and she had become its messenger. Tessa didn't remember falling, but she did remember the cold. It was suffocating, like being trapped under the weight of an ocean, a crushing, endless pressure pulling her deeper. The darkness swirled around her, a thick, oily miasma, and the whispers were everywhere. Inside her, around her, beneath her skin, the voices drummed into her mind, all at once, overlapping, suffocating, devouring. You have opened the door. You cannot close it now. We are the hollow. Her body moved, though she wasn't sure how. like a marionette being dragged along by invisible strings. The darkness shifted. There was no ground, only a void that stretched on for eternity, a place outside time itself. It felt ancient. It felt alive. The whispers weren't just voices anymore. They were feelings, terrors and desires tangled together, raw and insatiable. And then she was standing, but not in Oakwood. She was in a place far worse. The walls around her seemed to breathe, but not with air, more like they were pulsing, expanding with each slow, painful heartbeat. The floor beneath her feet felt soft, wet, slick. It was the texture of a nightmare. There were no doors, no window, just an endless, writhing expanse of darkness, and the weight of 1,000 watching eyes. A figure stood in the center of the room. It was familiar yet wrong. Elias Hart, or rather what Elias had become. His body was stretched and contorted, his limbs twisted into grotesque angles that defied nature. His eyes, those cold, endless eyes, shone with an unnatural light, glowing like burning stars trapped in a prison of flesh. His mouth opened, and out came the whispers again. Only this time, they weren't just voices. They were memories. They were her memories. "You are part of us now, Tessa." His voice was low, resonant, and it rattled her bones. The hollow doesn't let go. Tessa stepped back, the weight of the words sinking in. She had tried to close the door. She had tried to run, but now in this place, she realized there was no escaping. There was no going back. The hollow had marked her. She had opened the door, and she would never be free. "You won't survive this," Elias said, his smile growing wider and human. "None of us do, not really." Tessa opened her mouth to speak, but the words died on her tongue. A cold wind swept through the room, and in that gust, she saw something moving, a shape far in the distance, a figure humanoid but distorted. It was surrounded by writhing black tendrils, reaching for her, pulling the very light from the air. It came closer and the whispers grew louder. It was then that she understood. This place, the hollow, wasn't a physical space. It was a dimension, a place where the lost, the forgotten, the consumed, all resided. It was not just an apartment or a building or even a city. It was a realm, a living, breathing force that fed on souls, memories, lives, and now it was feeding on her. The figure approached, its face hidden beneath the shadow of its hood, but Tessa could feel its eyes, all-seeing, all-knowing, burrowing into her soul. It stretched a hand toward her, and the air seemed to thicken, suffocating her lungs. "Why fight?" the figure whispered, its voice neither male nor female, but both, and neither. "You open the door, Tessa. You belong here now. You will join us, all of us. You will feed the hollow." Tessa's heart raced in her chest. She could feel her body trembling, as if it was slowly being drained of all warmth, all life. The thing before her, whatever it was, wasn't real, not in the way she understood. It was a manifestation of the hollow's hunger, its desire to consume. She could feel it pressing against her, dragging her closer, until her feet were no longer touching the ground. Her thoughts seemed to float in space, disconnected from her body, disconnected from her very identity. The memories of her life, her friends, her family, the days before Oakwood, before 4B, all of it, were slipping away like sand through her fingers. She wasn't alone. The voices came again, louder now, and she could see them, spirits, faces half-formed, twitching, hungry. They reached out from the walls, from the air itself, their hands grasping for her. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the silence of the hollow. There was no escape, no way to fight. And then, Elias was beside her. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he asked, his face twisted with something ancient and hungry. "The hollow has no end. It has no beginning. It just is." Tessa tried to move, to pull away, but the force was too strong. The entity in front of her seemed to grow, its shape filling the space, until the room itself was suffocating her. She had been drawn into its belly, into the darkness at the heart of it all. There was no way out. But then, a thought pierced through the suffocating fog. The taker, the blade, the weapon that could remove, not kill, not destroy, but sever. It was a key, the one thing that could break the cycle. If she could just reach it, if she could just... The figure before her loomed closer, its mouth opening wider, revealing rows of teeth too sharp to be real. The hollow had already begun to feast on her thoughts, her memories. She was losing herself, losing the person she used to be. But in the corner of her mind, the spark of resistance remained. She still had the taker, The blade was still with her. She could still cut her way out. The hollow had no power over what she was. Not yet. She raised her hand, the taker trembling in her grip. And in that moment, she felt it, her connection to Oakwood, to the building, to the place that had trapped her. The hollow was more than a force. It was a place, a nexus, a prison, and she was going to tear it apart. Before she could act, Elias lunged at her, his mouth snapping, his form blurring in the air. But Tessa was ready. She slashed downward with the taker. The world screamed. The room spun. The darkness churned. Tessa's vision flickered between light and shadow, between reality and the nightmare she had found herself in. The blade had struck. It had connected. She could feel the hollow recoiling, shrieking, as if something had been severed, something that had kept it alive, kept it whole. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Tessa's body trembled, and she realized the battle wasn't won. The hollow was awake now. She had taken the first step, but the path ahead was only more uncertain, more treacherous. It would not give up. It would never give up. She had cut the tether, but the hollow would fight back, and so would she. Tessa stood amidst the churning darkness, her body shaking with exhaustion and terror. The taker was still in her hand, its blade now dim and cracked, the last remnants of light flickering from its edges. The hollow writhed around her, an entity of hunger, of chaos, of endlessness. She could feel it, deep within her chest, like the beat of a heart that wasn't her own. The whispers that had once been distant were now deafening, a cacophony of voices, screams, laughter, pleas for mercy. She had struck it. She had severed something, but not enough. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and she stumbled as the walls seemed to fold inward, distorting, twisting in on themselves. The hollow wasn't just a thing. It was the space, the air, the light itself. It was everywhere, and it was alive. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and she realized the room was closing in on her, the edges of reality warping into grotesque shapes. Elias' heart stood before her, his form shifting like smoke. His eyes glowed like burning coals, his mouth wide in a twisted smile that stretched impossibly, stretching until his face became a grotesque mask of hunger and desire. He was the hollow now, or perhaps the hollow had become him. "You think you can escape, Tessa?" Elias's voice was a low growl, an echo that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. "The door has already opened. The trap has already been set. There's no going back." Tessa's heart pounded. The taker trembled in her hand, as if alive, as if it knew what she had to do. She looked at the figure before her, the one that had once been Elias, and her mind flickered back to that first moment when she had opened the door to forbid. It had been sealed for a reason. It had been closed for a reason. She had broken the seal, torn the wall between worlds apart. And now the hollow was here. Now she understood. "You're not Elias anymore," Tessa whispered, her voice trembling. "You're part of it, all of it." Elias, no, the thing in his shape let out a laugh, low and mocking. "We are all part of it, Tessa. Every soul that has ever been lost, every life that has been consumed. They are us now. And soon you will be too. You will feed the hollow, just as everyone before you had." The air around her thickened, and the walls began to pulse, their once smooth surface rippling like water disturbed by an unseen force. Shapes began to emerge from the walls. Humanoid figures, their faces twisted in agony, their bodies stretching unnaturally, their hands reaching for her, whispering her name. "Tessa, Tessa." Her vision blurred and she staggered backward, clutching the taker. She could feel it. The hollow wasn't just pulling her in. It was trying to break her, to consume her, piece by piece. Her memories were slipping through her fingers, fading like smoke, and she felt the pull of the darkness, the hunger that threatened to devour her entire being. But she wasn't alone. Not anymore. Her eyes flashed to the edges of the room, and there, standing in the shadows, was a figure she recognized. Arturo Diaz. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollowed out, as if he had aged 1,000 years in mere moments. He was the one who had warned her, the one who had seen it all, but never escaped. His body was shaking, his hands outstretched, as though he were pleading with her. "Tessa, you have to end it. You are the key." His voice cracked as the shadows around him began to consume him, dragging him into the walls. The hollow was taking him again, just as it had taken him all those years ago, just as it would take everyone. But Arturo was right. Tessa was the key. She had opened the door. She had cut the tether. Now she had to end it. Tessa took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the taker in her hand. She could feel its power, its dark energy coursing through her. But it wasn't enough. The hollow was still too strong. Elias was still there, his twisted form blocking her path. She couldn't kill it, not like this. Then it came to her, the one thing she hadn't understood until now. She had to become it. She had to become the hollow to destroy it. In an instant the world around her shifted. The air turned cold. The shadows deepened. And her body felt as if it were stretching, warping, becoming something else. The taker burned hot in her hand, its energy surging through her, melding with her very soul. She felt her body twist, her mind unravel. As the hollow tried to claim her, it whispered in her ears, urging her to give in. But Tessa fought back. She pushed the taker forward, slicing through the air, through the space between worlds. She could feel it. The hollow was trying to consume her, but she was stronger now. She was the one who had opened the door, and she was the one who would close. With one final desperate cry, she thrust the blade deep into the air itself, into the heart of the hollow. The world shattered. Everything went black. When Tessa woke, it was quiet. The darkness was gone. The whispers were gone. The weight of the hollow had lifted, and Oakwood, the building, was silent. The air was still, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Tessa could breathe again. She was back in her apartment. The walls were intact, the floor solid beneath her feet. There was no more twisting, no more stretching, no more hunger. But something had changed. Tessa looked down at her hands. They were hers again. Flesh, bone, blood, but the air around her felt wrong. Too still. There was no noise, no movement, no sound of life outside. She walked to the window, her breath catching as she gazed out into the streets. They were empty. The buildings stood tall, but they were dark, lifeless. Oakwood was still there. The hollow hadn't just consumed the people within it, it had consumed everything. Tessa had stopped it. She had closed the door, but at what cost? Her heart began to race, as a single thought crossed her mind, one she had never considered. The hollow hadn't disappeared. It had moved. It had left Oakwood. And now it was everywhere. And that is the end of No One Dared Ask Why Apartment 4B was nailed shut. Thank you for reading this terrifying journey. I hope it kept you at the edge of your seat until the very end. Let me know your thoughts. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Would you dare open the door? Let me know what you think.